Can I eat what you're about to throw away? The question was so quiet, yet it cut through the entire restaurant like a scream. Inside the elegant dining room of the Grand Willow, silverware paused in midair. Conversations faded. Even the soft piano music seemed to lose its rhythm. At a corner table by the window, Eleanor Whitmore, one of the wealthiest women in the city, slowly lifted her eyes from her untouched plate. Standing beside her table was a young, homeless woman named Grace Miller. She could not have been more than 26. Her gray shirt was torn at the shoulder. Her jeans were frayed at the knees. Her shoes looked as if they had survived too many cold nights on unforgiving sidewalks. Over one shoulder, she carried a large black trash bag tied tightly like it held the last pieces of her life. Grace lowered her head, ashamed of every eye now staring at her. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she whispered. "I haven't eaten in 3 days. I saw you were leaving the bread, and half the fish. I didn't mean to bother you." A woman nearby scoffed. A man in a gray suit shook his head with disgust. The restaurant manager was already rushing over, ready to drag Grace back outside. But Eleanor raised one hand. "Don't touch her." The room froze. Then Eleanor looked at the trembling girl and said softly, "You won't eat my leftovers? You'll sit with me and have a proper meal." Grace stood frozen. For a moment, she looked at Eleanor Whitmore as if the woman had spoken in a language she no longer remembered. Kindness. Not pity. Not impatience. Not the hard, cold voice people used when they wanted her gone. Real kindness. The restaurant manager, Mr. Lawson, stopped with his hand still half raised. His polished smile cracked. Around them, the room stayed painfully quiet. A fork touched a plate somewhere in the back, and the tiny sound seemed too loud. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said carefully. "I'm terribly sorry for the disturbance. I'll take care of this right away." Eleanor did not look at him. "I said she is staying." Grace shook her head quickly. Her fingers tightened around the knot of her black trash bag. "No, please," she whispered. "I don't want any trouble. I can go." "Really? I shouldn't have come in here." Her voice broke on the last word. A woman at the next table leaned toward her husband and muttered, "Unbelievable." Grace heard it. Of course she heard it. People like her heard everything. Every laugh. Every insult. Every chair pulled away. Every silence that said you don't belong here. But Eleanor heard it too. Slowly, the billionaire turned her head toward the woman. Then she looked back at Grace. "You asked for food," Eleanor said, her voice low but steady. "You did not ask to be humiliated." Grace's eyes lifted. No one had ever said it like that before. Mr. Lawson cleared his throat. "Ma'am, with respect, some of our guests may feel uncomfortable." Eleanor finally faced him. "And what exactly should make them uncomfortable?" she asked. "Her hunger, her clothes? Or the fact that a person had to beg for bread in a room full of people wasting food?" The manager's face went pale. No one moved. Eleanor pushed back her chair and stood. She was small, elegant, dressed in cream-colored silk with pearls at her throat. But in that moment she seemed taller than everyone in the room. "Bring another chair," she said. "A clean plate. Fresh silverware. Hot soup. Fresh bread. And whatever the kitchen is most proud of today." Mr. Lawson blinked. "For her?" Eleanor's eyes sharpened. "For my guest." That word landed hard. Guest. Grace swallowed as tears filled her eyes. "I'm not dressed for this place," she said. Eleanor stepped closer, gently enough not to frighten her. "Neither was I once." Grace stared at her. For the first time, Eleanor's face changed. Behind all the money, all the power, all the calm control, there was something wounded. Something old. Something hidden. A memory passed through her eyes so quickly that no one else would have noticed. But Grace did. The chair arrived. Grace sat on the very edge of it as if she expected someone to change their mind and throw her out. She placed the trash bag beside her feet but kept one hand on it, guarding the only thing she owned. When the soup came, steam rose in soft white curls. Grace stared at it. Her hands trembled as she picked up the spoon. Eleanor saw the shaking. She saw the dirt on the girl's face. She saw the fresh tear tracks cutting through it. And she saw something else. The shape of Grace's eyes. The way her brow tightened when she tried not to cry. A small familiar look that struck Eleanor so deeply she almost forgot to breathe. Grace lifted the first spoonful to her mouth. Then she stopped. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know why you're doing this." Eleanor reached across the table and placed her hand over Grace's. The whole restaurant watched. Eleanor did not care. "Because no one should have to prove they are human before being treated like one," she said. Grace lowered her head. This time she could not stop the tears. Mr. Lawson stood beside the table like a man trapped in his own expensive suit. His eyes moved from Grace's torn shoes to Eleanor's calm face. Then to the watching guests. Then back again. He forced a smile. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said softly, bending closer so the room would not hear, "I completely understand your generosity. Truly I do. But this is a private dining establishment. We have standards. Eleanor slowly set her napkin beside her plate. The movement was small. But the room felt it. Grace felt it too. Her spoon froze halfway between the bowl and her lips. She lowered it ashamed again as if the soup had suddenly become something she had stolen. I can leave, Grace whispered. Please? I don't want anyone getting in trouble because of me. Eleanor did not answer right away. She looked at the young woman's trembling hands. The black trash bag pressed against her ankle. The way Grace's shoulders had folded inward ready for the blow before it even came. Then Eleanor looked up at the manager. What standards? She asked. Mr. Lawson blinked. Excuse me? You said this place has standards, Eleanor said. Her voice was quiet. Too quiet. Tell me what they are? The manager's mouth opened then closed. A few guests shifted in their seats. The woman with the emerald necklace leaned back suddenly interested. The man in the gray suit pretended to study his wine glass but his eyes kept flicking toward them. Mr. Lawson swallowed. We simply want all guests to feel comfortable. Eleanor nodded once. All guests, she repeated. Then she turned her hand toward Grace. Is she not a guest? The question landed like a slap. No one breathed. Mr. Lawson's face tightened. Ma'am, with respect, she came in from the street. She has no reservation. She has no money, Eleanor finished. Grace lowered her eyes. Eleanor's gaze did not move. Is that what you were about to say? The manager said nothing. Eleanor stood again. This time every head in the restaurant turned. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Power did not always shout. Sometimes it simply stood still and made everyone else feel small. Listen to me carefully, Mr. Lawson, Eleanor said. That young woman asked for food. She did not insult anyone. She did not steal anything. She did not threaten a soul. Grace's lips parted slightly. No one had ever defended her like that. She came to my table hungry, Eleanor continued. And instead of seeing a human being, you saw a problem to remove. Mr. Lawson's polished face flushed red. I was only trying to protect the atmosphere. The atmosphere, Eleanor repeated almost sadly. She looked around the room, at the white tablecloths, the crystal glasses, the plates with more food left on them than Grace had eaten in days. The guest who had watched a starving young woman beg for scraps and decided the true inconvenience was having to see her. Then Eleanor's voice hardened. If the atmosphere of this restaurant depends on humiliating a hungry girl, then the problem is not her. A low murmur moved through the room. The woman in emeralds looked away. The man in the gray suit cleared his throat but said nothing. Mr. Lawson stepped closer, desperate now. Mrs. Whitmore, please. You are one of our most respected patrons. I only ask that we handle this discreetly. Eleanor's eyes sharpened. Discreetly means outside, doesn't it? The manager froze. You wanted to take her by the arm? Eleanor said, each word clean and heavy. Walk her past all these tables, push her back into the street, and call that dignity. Grace's breath caught. Her hand moved to her arm right where Mr. Lawson had nearly grabbed her. The gesture was so small that most people missed it. Eleanor did not. She stepped closer to Grace's chair. From this moment on, Eleanor said, no one touches her. No one removes her. No one speaks to her as if she is less than anyone else in this room. Mr. Lawson's jaw tightened. And if that is a problem, Eleanor added, then bring me the owner. A strange silence followed. The manager's face changed. Not much. Just enough. Because everyone in that restaurant knew what he knew. Eleanor Whitmore did not merely dine there. She owned the building. The kitchen door swung open behind him. A waiter appeared with fresh bread, then stopped dead, sensing the tension. Eleanor glanced at him. Please bring butter, she said gently. And another bowl of soup. My guest is still hungry. My guest. Again. Grace looked down at the table, but tears fell onto the clean white cloth. Not from hunger this time. From being protected. From being seen. From hearing someone with power choose her in front of everyone. Mr. Lawson stepped back. Yes, Mrs. Whitmore, he said, his voice thin. He turned and walked away slower than before. The restaurant began to breathe again, but something had changed. People still stared, but their faces were different now. Some looked embarrassed. Some looked angry. A few looked ashamed. Eleanor sat back down across from Grace. For a moment she said nothing. She only pushed the basket of warm bread closer. Grace wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. I don't understand, she whispered. Why would you stand up for me? Eleanor looked at her carefully. The girl's eyes were still full of tears. Dark, familiar, impossible. And somewhere deep inside Eleanor's chest an old wound opened. Because once Eleanor said quietly, someone should have stood up for me too. Grace stared at her. Outside the city moved on. Cars passed. People laughed on the sidewalk. The afternoon sun touched the restaurant windows like nothing extraordinary had happened. But inside at that small table, everything had shifted. A billionaire had drawn a line in the middle of a room full of judgment. And a homeless girl who had walked in asking for scraps was no longer standing alone. Grace sat there with both hands wrapped around the warm bowl of soup as if the heat might disappear if she let go. The bread was soft. The butter melted into it. The smell alone made her close her eyes for half a second. But even with food in front of her, even with Eleanor Whitmore sitting across the table like a shield, Grace could not relax. Her body did not know how. For months she had learned to eat quickly, sleep lightly, walk with her head down, keep moving before someone told her to move. She had learned which benches the police checked first, which alleys were too dangerous after dark, and which restaurants threw away food while it was still clean. She had also learned something worse. That most people could look straight at her and not see a person. Eleanor watched her take a small bite of bread. Grace chewed slowly, but her eyes kept darting around the room. Every whisper felt like a warning. Every glance felt like a hand pushing her back toward the door. "You don't have to be afraid," Eleanor said softly. Grace gave a tiny laugh, but there was no humor in it. "Yes, ma'am," she whispered. "I do?" Eleanor leaned forward. "Why?" Grace looked at her as if the answer should have been obvious. "Because people change their minds." The words were simple. They hit Eleanor harder than expected. Grace lowered her gaze to the white tablecloth. Her fingers tightened around the spoon until her knuckles showed through the dirt on her skin. "One minute they act kind," she said. "The next minute they remember what I look like, what I smell like, where I came from. Then their faces change." She swallowed. "I've seen it happen." Eleanor did not interrupt. Grace stared at the soup as steam curled between them. "When you sleep outside long enough, you start understanding things nobody says out loud," she continued. "You learn when someone is about to laugh. You learn when a security guard is about to grab your arm. You learn when a woman is holding her purse tighter because you walked too close." Her voice grew smaller. "And after a while you start believing them." Eleanor's face softened. "Believing what?" Grace's lips trembled. "That maybe they're right." The restaurant noise seemed to fade again. Grace pressed her mouth shut, fighting herself. She had not meant to say this much. Hunger had made her desperate. Kindness had made her weak. Or maybe it had simply made her honest. "I wasn't always like this," she said quickly, as if defending a person no one could see anymore. "I had a job once. A room. Clean clothes. I used to help take care of kids at a daycare. I loved it. I wanted to be a teacher someday." Her eyes filled. "But things happen. One bad month becomes two. Someone lies to you. Someone takes what little you saved. You miss rent. You lose your phone. Then you lose your address. And once you lose your address, people act like you lost your name too." Eleanor sat perfectly still. Grace wiped her cheek with the heel of her hand, embarrassed. "I tried shelters," she whispered. "Some were full. Some weren't safe. Some made me feel smaller than the street did. So I kept moving." She looked down at her torn shoes. "And then one day I caught my reflection in a store window. I almost didn't recognize myself." A tear dropped onto her sleeve. "That scared me more than being hungry." Eleanor's throat tightened. Grace forced out a broken smile. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't be saying all this. You were just trying to feed me." "No," Eleanor said. "I asked who made you feel worthless." Grace looked up. Eleanor's voice was gentle, but her eyes were wet now. "And I'm listening." That undid her. Grace covered her mouth, but the sob came anyway. Small at first. Then deeper. The kind of crying a person does when they have been strong for too long and finally finds a place where they do not have to be. "I don't want to be this," Grace whispered. "I don't want people to look at me like I'm trash. I don't want to wake up every morning wondering if today is the day I stop mattering completely." Eleanor reached across the table again. This time Grace did not pull away. The billionaire's clean jeweled hand closed around the homeless girl's trembling fingers. And nobody in the restaurant dared say a word. "You matter now," Eleanor said. Grace shook her head, crying harder. "You mattered before you walked in," Eleanor continued. "You mattered when you were hungry. You mattered when they ignored you. You mattered even when you stopped believing it yourself." Grace bowed her head over the table. For the first time in a long time, she was not being told to leave. She was being asked to stay. Eleanor kept holding Grace's hand, but her mind was no longer fully inside the restaurant. It had gone somewhere darker. Somewhere older. A hospital hallway. White lights. Rain tapping against the windows. A nurse who would not meet her eyes. A doctor speaking in a voice that was too soft to be trusted. "We did everything we could, Mrs. Whitmore." Eleanor blinked hard. Across from her, Grace was wiping her tears with a paper napkin, embarrassed by the mess of her own sadness. She tried to smile, but it came out broken. "I'm sorry," Grace whispered. "I don't usually fall apart in front of strangers." Eleanor did not answer. She was staring. Not rudely. Not coldly. But as if the young woman's face had become a door and behind it stood a life Eleanor had buried 22 years ago. Grace's eyes. That was where it started. Dark brown. Wide. Framed by long lashes. But it was not just their color, it was the way they held pain without surrendering to it. The way they looked ashamed and proud at the same time. The way they seemed to ask for nothing while begging not to be forgotten. Eleanor had seen those eyes before. On a baby girl wrapped in a pink hospital blanket. On a child who had reached for her finger with a tiny hand. On the daughter she had named Lily. The daughter she had been told was gone. Eleanor's breath caught. Grace noticed. "Mrs. Whitmore," she asked. "Are you okay?" Eleanor forced herself to look away, but the room tilted slightly around her. The crystal glasses. The white plates. The gold light through the window. Everything blurred at the edges. "I'm fine," she said. But her voice betrayed her. Grace sat up straighter. "You don't look fine. Do you need water?" That small concern pierced Eleanor deeper than any insult in the room ever could. A starving girl sitting in a place where half the room had judged her like trash was worried about the woman who had fed her. Eleanor reached for her glass, but her fingers trembled before they touched it. Grace saw that too. Without thinking, she picked up the glass and slid it gently toward her. "Here," she said softly. Eleanor stared at the gesture. So familiar. Lily had done that once. Not with water. With a silver spoon. A tiny baby hand pushing it across a tray, her little brow wrinkled in concentration while Eleanor laughed through tears of joy. The memory came so suddenly it stole the air from her lungs. Grace frowned. "Did I do something wrong?" "No," Eleanor whispered quickly. "No, sweetheart. You did nothing wrong." "Sweetheart?" The word slipped out before Eleanor could stop it. Grace froze. No one had called her that in years. The air between them changed. Eleanor noticed then what she had missed before. A small mark beneath Grace's left ear. Not dirt. Not a scratch. A tiny birthmark. Her heart slammed once against her ribs. Lily had one. The same place. The same shape. No. Eleanor's mind rejected it instantly. Impossible. Her daughter had died. She had held a tiny white casket. She had stood in the rain while men lowered it into the earth. She had spent 22 years building hotels, towers, and walls around a grief no amount of money could soften. And yet Grace sat across from her. With those eyes. That birthmark. That quiet way of holding pain like she had carried it since birth. Eleanor pressed a hand against her chest. Grace leaned forward. "Mrs. Whitmore, please, should I call someone?" Eleanor looked at her. Really looked at her. For one dangerous second the restaurant disappeared. The gossiping guests disappeared, the polished floors, the expensive silver, the waiting manager near the kitchen door, all of it faded. Only Grace remained. A homeless young woman with shaking hands. A stranger. And maybe, the echo of a daughter Eleanor had never stopped loving. "I'm sorry," Eleanor said, her voice barely above a breath. "You remind me of someone." Grace's expression softened. "Someone you lost." Eleanor closed her eyes. A tear slipped down before she could hide it. "Yes," she whispered. "Someone I lost a long time ago." Grace lowered her gaze, gentle now, almost protective. "I'm sorry," she said. "Losing people changes you." Eleanor opened her eyes again. The girl did not know what those words had done. She did not know that in that moment Eleanor Whitmore's carefully locked heart had cracked open. And behind that crack, a question began to breathe. A question too wild to say out loud. What if Lily had not been lost forever? Eleanor tried to steady herself, but the question had already taken root. It sat between her ribs like a burning match. She watched Grace lift the spoon again, forcing herself to eat though her emotions had clearly taken her appetite hostage. The young woman moved carefully, almost apologetically, as if even breathing too loudly might get her removed from the table. Eleanor could not stand it. "Grace," she said softly. The girl looked up. "Yes, ma'am? Do you have family?" The spoon stopped. Just like that, the warmth disappeared from Grace's face. Not anger. Not surprise. Something older. A door slamming shut inside her. She lowered the spoon back into the bowl and stared at the soup as if the answer might be floating there. "No," she said. One word. Flat, small, final. Eleanor's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. "No one at all." Grace gave a quiet laugh, but it broke before it could become sound. "I used to ask that question too." Eleanor did not move. Grace swallowed and looked toward the window. Outside, people passed by with shopping bags and sunglasses, living ordinary lives that did not know how lucky they were. "I grew up in a children's home," Grace said. "Street Agnes House. Just outside the city." Eleanor's breath caught so sharply she had to hide it behind her napkin. St. Agnes? The name struck her like a hand across the face. Grace did not notice. She kept speaking slowly now because once the truth began coming out, it seemed impossible to stop. They told me I was left there when I was a baby, she said. No note. No blanket. No name that mattered. Her eyes glistened again, but this time she did not wipe the tears away. They said my mother didn't want me. Eleanor's face went pale. Grace looked down at her hands. I don't remember her, obviously. How could I? But when you're little, you still imagine things. I used to picture her coming back. Every birthday I thought maybe that would be the day. Maybe she had been sick. Maybe she got lost. Maybe someone took me from her and she was still looking. Her lips trembled. Kids make up stories so the truth doesn't kill them. Eleanor's eyes filled. Grace pressed her fingers against the spoon, holding herself together. But nobody came. Not when I was 5. Not when I was 10. Not when I turned 18 and they handed me 2 trash bags with my clothes in them and told me I was old enough to figure life out. The black trash bag beside her foot suddenly seemed heavier than before. Eleanor looked at it. Grace noticed and gave a faint embarrassed smile. Funny, isn't it, she whispered. I left that place with trash bags. Now I carry my whole life in one. Eleanor wanted to reach for her. Wanted to pull her close. Wanted to scream at every wall, every record, every person who had touched this child's life and failed her. But she stayed still. Because Grace was not finished. I tried to tell myself it didn't matter, Grace continued. That family was just a word. That I didn't need a mother. That I didn't care why she left me. She looked up. And Eleanor saw it again. Those eyes. Lily's eyes. But I cared, Grace whispered. I cared every day. The words nearly broke Eleanor. Grace gave a shaky breath. The worst part wasn't being hungry. It wasn't sleeping outside. It wasn't people staring. The worst part was believing I was thrown away before I ever had a chance to be loved. Eleanor's hand rose to her mouth. Grace quickly looked ashamed. I'm sorry. That's too much. You don't need to hear all that. Yes, Eleanor said, her voice trembling. I do. Grace blinked. Eleanor leaned closer, fighting to keep her voice calm. Who told you your mother abandoned you? Grace shrugged faintly. The women at the home. The director. Everyone really. They said there was no record worth chasing. No record, Eleanor repeated. Grace shook her head. Nothing that helped. Just a date? A hospital name maybe? I stopped asking after a while. Eleanor's pulse hammered. What hospital? Grace hesitated. I don't remember exactly. Mercy something. Mercy General, I think. The room seemed to tilt again. Mercy General. The hospital where Eleanor had given birth. The hospital where she had been told her baby died. Eleanor sat back slowly as if the chair beneath her had vanished. Grace frowned with concern. Mrs. Whitmore? Eleanor forced a smile, but tears were already shining in her eyes. I'm listening, she whispered. And she was. To every word. Every clue. Every impossible piece falling into place. Across the table, Grace thought she was telling a stranger the story of being abandoned. But Eleanor heard something else. She heard the first heartbeat of a truth buried for 22 years. Eleanor did not hear the restaurant anymore. The soft piano in the corner faded into nothing. The clinking glasses became distant. Even Grace's voice seemed to reach her through water. Mercy General. Street Agnes House. A baby left behind. A mother who never came. Eleanor sat very still, but inside her everything was breaking open. 22 years ago she had walked into Mercy General as a young mother full of plans. She remembered the rain that night. The cold window glass against her palm. The nurse who kept telling her to rest. The tiny cry that had filled the room for only a few seconds before they took her baby away. Her daughter. Her Lily. Then came the fever. The medication. The blurred faces. The doctor's lowered eyes. And later the words that had buried her alive. Your baby didn't survive. Eleanor had believed them because grief leaves no room for questions. She had believed them because she was weak, sedated, broken, and surrounded by people who spoke with professional calm. She had signed papers she barely understood. She had watched a small white casket lowered into wet ground. But now across from her sat a young woman with Lily's eyes. Lily's birthmark. Lily's quiet way of folding pain into silence. Eleanor's hand moved under the table and gripped her napkin so tightly the fabric twisted between her fingers. No, it was impossible. And yet every impossible thing has a first moment when it starts to look real. Grace noticed the change in her face. Mrs. Whitmore, she asked gently. Did I say something wrong? Eleanor forced herself to breathe. No, she said. You didn't. Grace searched her, eyes confused. You look like you've seen a ghost. Eleanor almost laughed. A ghost. Yes. That was exactly what it felt like. Not a ghost from death. A ghost from a life stolen before it could begin. Eleanor looked down at Grace's hand resting beside the bowl. Thin fingers, chipped nails. A faint scar across one knuckle. Hands that had carried trash bags opened sheltered doors, searched garbage bins, and still slid a glass of water toward a trembling stranger. How could the world have treated these hands as worthless? How could her child, if this was her child, have spent even one night believing she had been thrown away? Eleanor's chest tightened so hard she almost reached across the table and said it. "I think you are my daughter." The words rose in her throat. They were dangerous. Too dangerous. Because what if she was wrong? What if grief had finally become madness? What if loneliness had shaped a stranger's face into the daughter she had lost? What if she gave Grace hope only to tear it away again? Grace had already survived too much. Eleanor would not wound her with a dream unless she could prove it. So she swallowed the words. All of them. Instead she asked quietly, "Do you know the exact date you were taken to Street Agnes?" Grace blinked at the sudden question. "I think it was in October," she said. "That's what they told me. They used October 17th as my birthday, but nobody was sure." Eleanor felt the floor drop beneath her. Lily was born on October 17th. For 1 second she could not move. The spoon slipped from Grace's hand and tapped softly against the bowl. "Ma'am?" Eleanor looked at her. The girl's face was open now. Worried. Innocent in a way life had tried to steal but had not fully destroyed. "I'm sorry," Eleanor whispered. "Your story it reminds me of something very painful." Grace's expression softened. "Then you don't have to ask anymore." That nearly broke her. A girl who had nothing was trying to protect a billionaire from pain. Eleanor reached for her glass and took a careful sip, buying herself time. Her mind was racing now. Mercy General records, Street Agnes house, old nurses, birth certificates, burial documents. DNA. DNA. The word flashed through her like lightning. There was a way to know. A way to pull truth out of the grave where lies had slept for 22 years. But she had to be careful. She had to move gently. Grace was not evidence. She was a wounded human being sitting across from her, still afraid someone might take the bread away. Eleanor set the glass down. "Grace," she said softly, "would you let me help you tonight?" Grace looked uncertain. "Help me how?" "A safe place to sleep," Eleanor said. "Clean clothes. A doctor if you need one. No pressure. No questions you don't want to answer." Grace's eyes filled again. "I don't know why you care so much." Eleanor's lips trembled, but she held herself together. "Maybe," she said, "because some people come into our lives for a reason we don't understand right away." Grace stared at her for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Just once. Small. Fragile. But enough." And as Eleanor watched that nod, the suspicion inside her stopped being a whisper. It became a storm. A terrifying, beautiful storm. Maybe Lily had not died. Maybe the little girl she had mourned for 22 years had grown up under another name. And maybe by some miracle too painful to believe she had just walked into her mother's life asking for leftovers. Eleanor did not tell Grace what she suspected. Not that night. Not in the restaurant. Not while the girl still sat with one hand on her black trash bag, eating warm bread like kindness might vanish if she looked away too long. Because one wrong word could destroy her. One false hope could cut deeper than hunger. So Eleanor smiled gently even though her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. "Eat slowly," she said. "There's no rush." Grace gave a small uncertain nod. No rush. The word sounded strange to her. Her whole life had been rush. Rush before the shelter doors closed. Rush before the rain started. Rush before someone noticed her standing too close to a warm doorway. Rush before the good food in the trash spoiled. But now for the first time in months no one was chasing her. Eleanor waited until Grace had finished the soup, half the fish, and 2 pieces of bread. Then she signaled quietly to Mr. Lawson, who approached as if walking toward a courtroom. "I need a private car brought to the front," Eleanor said. "And have someone pack a fresh meal to go." "For the young lady?" he asked carefully. Eleanor looked at him. "For Miss Miller." The correction was soft. But it landed. Grace blinked at the sound of her name, said with respect. "Miss Miller. Not girl. Not homeless. Not problem. A person." When they stepped outside, the afternoon had begun to fade. The sidewalk glowed gold beneath the setting sun. People passed by without knowing that 2 lives had just shifted behind the glass doors of that restaurant. A black sedan pulled up to the curb. Grace stopped. Her face changed. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said quickly, "I can't get in that car." Eleanor turned. "Why not?" Grace hugged the trash bag tighter. "Because people don't just do this. Not for me." Eleanor's heart twisted. She took one slow step closer. "I understand why you're scared," she said. "You don't know me. You don't owe me trust." Grace's eyes searched her face. "But I can get you a clean room tonight," Eleanor continued. "A safe one. You can lock the door from the inside. You can leave whenever you want. No one will force you to stay. Grace looked at the car again. Then, down at her shoes. What do you want from me? The question came out sharp. Not rude. Wounded. Eleanor felt it. She could have said the truth. She could have said, I want to know if you are my child. She could have said, I have spent 22 years mourning a daughter who may be standing right in front of me. But she did not. Grace deserved proof, not panic. So Eleanor answered carefully. I want you to be safe tonight. Grace stared at her for a long time. The city moved around them. Cars rolled past. A siren wailed far away. Somewhere down the block, a man laughed into his phone. Finally, Grace whispered, Just tonight? Eleanor nodded. Just tonight? That was enough. Grace climbed into the car with the boxed meal on her lap and her trash bag pressed against her knees. Eleanor sat beside her, close enough to protect her, far enough not to frighten her. As the car pulled away, Eleanor looked out the window and made a silent decision. She would call her attorney. She would reopen the hospital records. She would find the truth behind the white casket, the missing documents, the orphanage, and the lie that had stolen 22 years from both of them. But until she knew for certain, she would not say the words. She would not place a mother's dream on a homeless girl's shoulders. Not yet. Beside her, Grace leaned back against the leather seat. Her eyes fluttered, exhausted beyond words. For the first time in a long time, she felt warm. Eleanor watched her in silence, holding back tears. Because sometimes love has to wait. Sometimes hope has to move quietly. And sometimes the truth is so powerful that even a billionaire must approach it on trembling feet. The hotel room was quiet enough for Grace to hear the hum of the air conditioner. She stood just inside the doorway, unsure what to touch. The room was simple but beautiful. A clean bed, fresh towels, a small table with a lamp glowing warmly beside a vase of white flowers. To Grace, it felt less like a room and more like another world. Eleanor remained near the door. This is yours for tonight, she said gently. No one will come in unless you ask. Grace looked at the bed as if it might disappear. I can really sleep here. Yes. In the bed? Eleanor's throat tightened. Of course, in the bed. Grace nodded slowly, but her eyes filled again. She turned away fast, pretending to examine the curtains. Eleanor understood. Some people cried loudly when life hurt them. Grace cried quietly when life was kind. That night, after making sure Grace had food, clean clothes, and a phone to call the front desk, Eleanor returned to her penthouse. She did not sleep. She sat at her desk with the city lights glittering below and began making calls. Her attorney. Her private investigator. An old hospital administrator. A retired nurse whose name had been buried in a file from Mercy General. By morning, the first records arrived. By noon, Eleanor's hands were shaking. There were missing pages. Changed signatures. A death certificate with a doctor's name that did not match the hospital's official log. A burial record with no proper identification number. And one transfer note almost hidden in an old archive mentioning an unnamed infant moved from Mercy General to Street Agnes House on October 17th. Eleanor read that line again and again. Her vision blurred. Unnamed infant, Street Agnes House. October 17th, Lily's birthday. Still, she did not tell Grace. Not yet. She needed certainty. Not hope. Not almost. Not a mother's desperate imagination. Truth. So Eleanor arranged it carefully. The next afternoon she visited Grace at the hotel with breakfast and a small bag of clothes. Grace looked different after one night of safety. Her hair was washed. Her face was clean. But the fear was still there, hiding behind her eyes. You look rested, Eleanor said. Grace gave a shy smile. I slept for 12 hours. I didn't know a person could sleep that hard. Eleanor smiled back, but her heart ached. Later, a doctor came to check Grace's health. Blood pressure. Dehydration. Bruises. Old exhaustion that no medicine could fix in one day. At the end, the doctor gently drew a small blood sample. Grace looked at Eleanor. Is something wrong with me? No, Eleanor said quickly. It's just to make sure you're healthy. That was not a lie. But it was not the whole truth. Eleanor hated herself for keeping it from her. For 3 days she lived between hope and terror. She went to meetings and heard nothing. She signed papers and remembered none of them. She sat across from Grace at meals and studied every expression like a prayer. The way Grace tucked her hair behind her left ear. The way she smiled with one corner of her mouth first. The way she apologized before asking for anything. Each small detail pulled Eleanor closer to the edge. Then on the 4th morning the call came. Eleanor was alone in her office when her attorney arrived in person. He did not sit down. He held a sealed envelope in both hands. Eleanor, he said quietly. You need to prepare yourself. Her knees weakened. She took the envelope. For a moment she could not open it. 22 years of grief sat inside that paper. 22 years of birthdays spent alone. 22 years of standing beside a grave that might have held nothing but a lie. Finally, she broke the seal. Her eyes moved down the page. DNA match 99,99%. Biological relationship confirmed. Mother and daughter. The room vanished. Eleanor made one sound. Not a scream. Not a sob. Something deeper. The sound of a woman whose heart had been buried alive and suddenly heard it beating again. She pressed the paper to her chest and folded forward, crying so hard she could not breathe. Lily was alive. Only now her name was Grace. And she had spent the night before in a hotel room 2 floors below, still believing she had no mother in the world. Eleanor stood outside Grace's hotel room for almost a full minute before she knocked. The DNA report was folded inside her handbag, but it felt heavier than stone. Her hand trembled. Not because she was afraid of the truth anymore. She was afraid of what the truth had cost. Behind that door was the daughter she had mourned for 22 years. The baby she had kissed once, held once, loved forever. And that same daughter had grown up believing she had been abandoned, unwanted, thrown away like something no one cared to claim. Eleanor closed her eyes. Then she knocked. A few seconds passed. The door opened. Grace stood there in a soft blue sweater Eleanor had sent up from the hotel boutique. Her hair was still damp from a shower. Clean, she looked even younger. More fragile somehow. Like the street had been a coat she had worn for survival, and now without it all the wounds underneath were visible. "Mrs. Whitmore," Grace said. "Is everything okay?" Eleanor tried to speak. Nothing came out. Grace's smile faded. "Did I do something wrong?" That question broke her. Eleanor shook her head quickly. "No. No, sweetheart, you did nothing wrong." Again that word. Sweetheart. Grace's eyes softened, but confusion remained. Eleanor stepped inside. The door clicked shut behind her. For a moment, neither woman moved. The room was filled with morning light, soft and golden, spilling across the carpet and the untouched breakfast tray by the window. Eleanor slowly reached into her handbag. "I need to tell you something," she said. "And I need you to know I did not hide it to hurt you. I hid it until I was sure." Grace's body tightened. "Sure about what?" Eleanor unfolded the paper with shaking fingers. "I had a daughter," she whispered. 22 years ago. Her name was Lily." Grace stayed silent. "They told me she died at Mercy General Hospital. They gave me papers. They gave me a coffin. They gave me a grave." Her voice cracked. "And I believed them." Grace's face went pale. Eleanor held out the report, but Grace did not take it yet. "After you told me about Street Agnes? After you told me your birthday? I checked everything. The hospital records, the orphanage files, the old documents." Grace took one step back. "No," she whispered, though Eleanor had not said the words yet. Eleanor's tears fell freely now. "Yes." Grace stared at her. Eleanor lifted the paper between them. "The DNA test confirmed it. You are my daughter." The room went silent. Grace looked at the report, then at Eleanor, then back again. Her lips parted, but no sound came. She reached for the paper with both hands. Her fingers shook so badly the page rattled. She read the words. "Mother and daughter. Confirmed." For a long moment she did not cry. She simply stood there as if her whole life had stopped and started again inside the same breath. Then her knees weakened. Eleanor caught her before she fell. Grace grabbed Eleanor's arms, staring into her face like a child trying to recognize a dream. "You didn't leave me," she whispered. Eleanor made a broken sound. "No, never." Grace's face crumpled. "They told me you didn't want me. I wanted you every day of my life. They said nobody came. I was told you were gone." Grace pressed one hand over her mouth. A sob tore through her, raw and small and 22 years old. Eleanor pulled her close. And this time Grace did not stiffen. She collapsed into her mother's arms. Not politely. Not carefully. Completely. The black trash bag sat in the corner of the room, forgotten at last. Grace buried her face against Eleanor's shoulder and cried like the little girl who had waited at every birthday, every window, every locked door, hoping a mother might still be looking for her. Eleanor held her like she could hold back every lost year. "I'm here," Eleanor whispered into her hair. "I'm here now. I'm so sorry, my baby. I'm so sorry." Grace clutched her tighter. "My name is Grace," she sobbed. Eleanor kissed the side of her head. "Yes," she whispered. "And before that you were Lily?" Grace pulled back just enough to look at her. "Can I be both?" Eleanor touched her daughter's face with trembling hands. "You can be anything you want," she said. "But you will never be alone again." Grace broke down again, but this time her tears were different. Not from hunger. Not from shame. Not from fear. They were the tears of a daughter who had finally found the answer to the question that had haunted her whole life. She had not been unwanted. She had been stolen. And her mother had never stopped loving her. For a long time neither of them moved. Eleanor sat on the edge of the hotel bed with Grace in her arms, holding her like the world might try to take her again. Grace's face stayed buried against her shoulder, her fingers clenched in the soft fabric of Eleanor's jacket. 22 years had been stolen. But in that room for the first time, time stopped running away from them. After the tears slowed, Eleanor brushed Grace's damp hair away from her face. "Tell me," she whispered. "Tell me everything you want me to know." Grace looked down at her hands. There was fear there. Not fear of Eleanor. Fear of opening doors she had spent years trying to lock. "I don't know where to start," she said. Eleanor gently squeezed her hand. "Start wherever it hurts." Grace gave a small broken smile. "That's a lot of places." She took a breath. Then she began. Street Agnes house was the first place she remembered. Not warmly. Not cruelly in the obvious way. It was worse than that. It was cold. Organized. Clean enough for inspections but never soft enough for a child. Beds lined up in rows. Shoes placed under them. Names written on metal lockers. Grace remembered birthdays where nobody knew what to say because nobody was sure it was really her birthday. She remembered sitting by the window every October 17th watching cars pass by, wondering if one of them might stop. None ever did. "I used to make up stories," she said quietly. "I told myself my mother was a singer, or a nurse. Or maybe someone rich who lost me by accident." Eleanor covered her mouth with one hand. Grace looked at her eyes shining. "I guess one part was true." Eleanor let out a tearful laugh, but it broke into silence. Grace continued. "When she was little, she learned quickly not to ask too many questions. The women at the home got tired of them. Other kids teased her for waiting, so she stopped saying she wanted a mother. But she never stopped wanting one." At school, Grace found safety in books, especially in classrooms. She liked the smell of crayons, chalk, dust, pencil shavings. She liked helping younger children sound out words. She liked tying shoelaces, wiping tears, telling scared little kids, "You're okay. I'm right here." "I wanted to be a teacher," she said, "more than anything." Eleanor looked at her daughter with aching pride. "You would have been wonderful." Grace looked away. "I almost was." After leaving Street Agnes at 18, Grace found work at a small daycare. It was not much money, but it gave her purpose. The children loved her. She remembered every allergy, every favorite snack, every child who needed a little extra patience at nap time. For the first time, she had a room of her own. A tiny room above a laundromat. One window. One mattress. A hot plate that only worked when it felt like it, but to Grace it had been a palace. Then came Caleb Ross. She said his name carefully, like it still had sharp edges. He was charming at first. Kind when she was lonely. He told her she was too smart to be cleaning up after children all day. He said he knew people. He said he could help her enroll in community college. He said love should feel like trust. So Grace trusted him. She let him hold her savings. Then one morning he was gone. Her money was gone too. So was the rent. "So I lost the room," Grace whispered. "Then the job? Then my phone. Then every person who said they'd help stopped answering." Eleanor's face hardened, but she stayed quiet. Grace's voice grew smaller. "I didn't become homeless all at once. I disappeared piece by piece." That sentence filled the room. Eleanor reached for her hand again. Grace let her. "I was so ashamed," she said. "I thought if my real mother ever saw me, she would be disgusted." Eleanor shook her head, tears falling again. "My God, no." Grace finally looked at her. "I wanted to be someone worth finding." Eleanor pulled her close. "You were always worth finding," she whispered. "I just didn't know where to look." Grace closed her eyes. And for the first time, when she cried, she did not cry like an orphan. She cried like a daughter who had finally come home. The next morning, Grace woke to sunlight on her face. For a few seconds she forgot where she was. There was no cold sidewalk under her back. No sirens echoing between buildings. No cardboard pressed against her shoulder. No fear of someone kicking her awake before dawn. Just a clean pillow. A warm blanket. And a quiet room. Then she remembered. Eleanor. The DNA test. Mother and daughter. Grace sat up slowly, holding the blanket to her chest as if the truth itself might still be fragile. Across the room, the black trash bag rested beside the chair, out of place in all that softness. She stared at it for a long time. That bag had carried her whole life yesterday. Today, it looked like a witness. Downstairs in a coffee shop 3 blocks from the hotel, Caleb Ross sat hunched over a cracked phone, scrolling through local gossip pages. He had not thought about Grace Miller in months. Not with guilt. Not with regret. People like Caleb did not carry guilt. They carried excuses. Then he saw the photo. It had been taken outside the restaurant. A blurry image of Eleanor Whitmore helping a young homeless woman into a private car. The caption was already spreading fast. Billionaire Eleanor Whitmore rescues mystery woman after restaurant confrontation. Caleb leaned closer. His smirk faded. No way, he muttered. He zoomed in. The clean face was hidden slightly by hair, but he knew those eyes. He knew the small birthmark near her ear. He knew the girl he had lied to, charmed, robbed, and left behind when she still believed love could save her. Grace. Only now, she was standing beside one of the richest women in the city. Caleb's mind did not go to apology. It went to money. He searched again. More photos. More rumors. Someone claimed the woman had been moved into a Whitmore hotel. Someone else said Eleanor had personally paid for her medical care. Another comment said the billionaire looked at the girl like family. Family. That word made Caleb sit back. Then slowly a grin spread across his face. Grace had been easy to fool once. Lonely people were always easy. Tell them they matter. Tell them they are special. Tell them the world was cruel, but you are different. He had done it perfectly. And if Grace was now close to Eleanor Whitmore, then maybe the door he had slammed behind him was not closed after all. Maybe it had become a vault. Caleb stood so quickly his chair scraped the floor. By noon he was outside the Whitmore Grand Hotel wearing his cleanest jacket and the same gentle expression he had practiced for years. The lobby security guard stopped him before he reached the elevators. "I'm here to see Grace Miller," Caleb said smoothly. "She's expecting me?" The guard looked unimpressed. "Name? Caleb Ross." At the sound of that name, Grace froze upstairs. She had been sitting with Eleanor near the window drinking tea she barely touched. Eleanor had just asked if she wanted to visit a doctor again, maybe a counselor, maybe someone who could help her begin healing. Then the phone rang. The front desk said his name. Caleb Ross. The teacup slipped slightly in Grace's hand. Eleanor noticed. "Who was he?" she asked. Grace did not answer right away. Her face had gone pale, but her eyes changed first. The softness disappeared. The old street fear returned quick and sharp. "He's the man who took everything from me," she whispered. Eleanor's expression hardened. Downstairs, Caleb kept smiling at the guard. "Tell her I just want to talk," he said. "Tell her, I've been worried sick." But upstairs, Grace stared at the phone like it was a snake. For years Caleb had been a wound she tried not to touch. Now he had come back. Not because he loved her. Not because he was sorry. But because he had finally realized the woman he threw away might be worth millions. That name hit Eleanor like a match dropped into dry grass. Caleb Ross. Grace had spoken it only once the night before, but Eleanor had remembered every detail. The charm. The lies. The stolen savings. The way he had walked out and left her daughter to fall through every crack in the world. Now he was downstairs. Smiling. Waiting. Pretending concern. Eleanor slowly stood from the chair by the window. "You don't have to see him," she said. Grace wrapped both hands around the teacup, though it had gone cold. "I know." But her voice said something different. It said the past had stepped into the lobby wearing a clean jacket. It said fear still knew her name. Eleanor picked up the phone and spoke to the front desk with a calm that made the air colder. "Do not let Mr. Ross upstairs. Keep him in the lobby. I'll be down shortly." Grace looked up fast. "Mom." The word slipped out. Both women froze. It was the first time Grace had said it. Eleanor's face softened for 1 second, almost breaking. Then she crossed the room and kissed Grace's forehead. "I'll handle him," she whispered. Downstairs, Caleb was leaning against a marble column playing the part of a worried man beautifully. His hair was combed back. His jacket was worn but clean. His eyes carried just enough sadness to fool someone who wanted to believe him. But Eleanor Whitmore did not want to believe him. She wanted the truth. The elevator doors opened. Caleb turned. For half a second greed flashed across his face before he covered it with humility. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, stepping forward. "Thank God. I've been worried about Grace. I heard she was here and I just..." "Stop." One word. He stopped. The lobby seemed to quiet around them. Eleanor walked toward him slowly, every step measured. "You are Caleb Ross?" "Yes, ma'am." "I'm someone who cares about her." Eleanor's eyes did not blink. "Funny. She remembers you as someone who stole from her." Caleb's mouth twitched. Then came the wounded expression. "Classic? Practiced? Empty?" "That's not fair," he said softly. Grace was confused back then. We were both struggling. I made mistakes, sure, but I loved her. Eleanor's jaw tightened. "Do not use that word in my hotel." Caleb looked around, realizing several staff members were watching. His tone changed. "Not much. Just enough." "Look," he said lower. "I don't want trouble. I just think Grace and I should talk privately. She'd want to hear what I have to say." "No," Eleanor said. "You want access." Caleb smiled. This time the mask slipped. "Access to what?" "To my daughter." The word daughter landed between them like thunder. Caleb's eyes widened. There it was. Confirmation. The rumor was true. For one moment, Caleb Ross forgot to act. Then he looked away, but Eleanor had already seen it. The calculation. The hunger. The numbers adding themselves behind his eyes. Upstairs, Grace stood just inside the suite door, unable to sit still. Her heart hammered so loudly she could barely hear the city below. She hated that Caleb could still do this to her. Hated that one phone call could pull her back into the old version of herself, the girl who apologized for needing too much, trusted too easily, and believed love meant handing someone the key to every locked room inside her. But Caleb was not the only ghost moving that day. Across town, in a private office paneled with dark wood and old money, Victor Whitmore received a call. Victor was Eleanor's cousin by marriage, a man who wore family loyalty like a silk tie, visible, expensive, and easily removed. For years he had lived near the edge of Eleanor's empire, smiling at charity dinners, sitting on boards, pretending patience while waiting for the old woman's fortune to loosen from her hands. When his assistant placed the phone on speaker, Victor barely looked up. Then he heard the caller's name. Caleb Ross. Victor's pen stopped. He listened as Caleb spoke quickly, nervously, greedily. A homeless woman named Grace, a billionaire calling her daughter. A DNA test maybe. A chance to make money before Eleanor locked everything behind lawyers. Victor said nothing for a long time. Then he stood and closed his office door. Tell me exactly what you know, he said. Caleb did. Every piece. Every rumor. Every detail he had picked up from the hotel lobby and online gossip. Victor's face changed as he listened. Not with surprise. With recognition. Because 22 years ago, Victor had known another name. Lily Whitmore. The baby who was never supposed to return. The infant whose disappearance had cleared the path for certain shares, certain trusts, certain inheritances to remain under adult control. The child Eleanor had buried while Victor quietly helped bury the truth. And now that child was alive. Older. Poorer. But alive. Victor walked to the window, looking down at the city Eleanor had built. His voice became very soft. Mr. Ross, he said, you and I may be able to help each other. Caleb smiled on the other end. Victor did not. For him this was not romance. Not revenge. Not even greed alone. It was survival. Because if Grace was truly Lily Whitmore, then 22 years of lies were about to rise from the grave, and Victor Whitmore intended to bury them again. The first lie arrived wrapped in kindness. It came the next morning in a cream-colored envelope delivered to Eleanor's private suite. No return address. No warning. Just her name written in careful black ink. Grace was sitting near the window trying to eat toast while Eleanor reviewed old hospital files at the dining table. Every few minutes, Eleanor looked up at her daughter as if afraid she might vanish if left unwatched for too long. Then the hotel manager knocked. Mrs. Whitmore, he said quietly, holding out the envelope. This was left at the front desk. Eleanor took it. The moment she opened it, the room changed. Inside was a handwritten letter. The words were ugly. Sharp. Personal. It claimed Grace had known who Eleanor was before entering the restaurant. It claimed Caleb had helped her plan everything. It said Grace had practiced the story about the orphanage, the hunger, the tears. It said the DNA test did not matter because blood did not prove love. Eleanor read the last line twice. She found you because you are rich, not because you are her mother. Grace watched Eleanor's face grow still. What is it, she asked. Eleanor folded the letter before Grace could see all of it. Nothing that deserves your tears. But Grace had already seen enough. Her face tightened. Is it from Caleb? Eleanor did not answer quickly enough. That was all the answer Grace needed. By afternoon the second attack came. A video. Sent from an unknown number. The screen showed Grace in the hotel lobby weeks earlier, except she had never been there weeks earlier. The image was grainy, edited, badly lit. In it a woman who looked like Grace seemed to be speaking to Caleb near the elevators. Then came the audio. Grace's voice or something close to it. She's lonely. If I play this right, I'll never sleep outside again. Eleanor felt the blood leave her face. Grace grabbed the phone. That's not me, she said immediately. I never said that. I swear to you. Her voice cracked on the word swear. Eleanor took the phone back and looked at the video again. Too smooth in some places. Too jumpy in others. A shadow crossing the wall that did not match the lobby lights. Fake. But cruelly made. Made to wound before the truth could catch up. I believe you, Eleanor said. Grace's eyes searched hers desperately. You do? Yes. But fear had already entered the room. Not fear of Grace. Fear of the people who wanted to separate them. Victor Whitmore understood exactly how to plant doubt. He had done it 22 years ago with doctors' papers, signatures, and silence. Now he used newer tools. Edited recordings, anonymous messages, paid witnesses who remembered things that never happened. By evening, one of them appeared. A woman named Marla Keene claiming she had worked at Street Agnes' house. She sat across from Eleanor in a private conference room, hands folded, voice trembling with false concern. I hate to say this, Marla whispered, but Grace was always clever. Even as a child. She learned how to make people feel sorry for her. Eleanor stared at her. Marla continued, encouraged by the silence. She used to talk about finding a rich family someday. Said she deserved more than the rest of us. Behind the glass wall, Grace stood in the hallway, hearing every word. Her face went white. For a moment she looked 8 years old again, waiting by a window, being told nobody was coming. Eleanor slowly turned toward Marla. Tell me, she said. What color were the walls in the girls' dormitory? Marla blinked. What? The walls, Eleanor repeated. Marla hesitated. White? Eleanor's eyes hardened. Grace had told her the night before. Pale yellow walls. Blue metal beds. One cracked window near the radiator. Eleanor leaned forward. You never worked there. Marla's mouth opened. No sound came. The lie collapsed right there. But the damage had already begun. Grace stepped back from the glass, breathing fast. Eleanor rushed out into the hallway. Grace. Grace shook her head, tears filling her eyes. They're going to make you hate me, she whispered. No. They'll keep lying until you wonder if one of them is true. Eleanor grabbed both her hands. Look at me. Grace tried, but her eyes kept falling. Eleanor lifted her chin gently. I lost you once because I believed what people handed me on paper, she said, voice shaking with fury and love. I will not lose you again because someone handed me a lie on a screen. Grace broke. Eleanor pulled her into her arms as the city lights flickered beyond the windows. And somewhere across town, Victor Whitmore waited for the doubt to spread. But he had made one mistake. This time, Eleanor was not a grieving young mother alone in a hospital bed. This time she was awake.